There it is. Now it's recording. Smile. You're on candid camera. All right. Let's do this. Okay, so today is kind of cool because today we are transitioning into the next stages of pre-production. So here's what you need to know. Your screenplay, you should be actively revising your screenplay, and you should be actively revising your screenplay continuously. Your final version of your screenplay isn't really due for a few more weeks, but you shouldn't wait to revise it. You should take it while it's fresh in your mind. You should take all that feedback that you got from class. You should look at that shared document. You should look at my comments that I left you on your PDFs, and you should be actively revising that a little bit all the time. You should be looking at it today. You should be looking at it tomorrow. You should be looking at it the next day, and just constantly kind of looking at it with fresh eyes, because that process of revising your screenplay is a process. It's not something that should just be done all in one shot. You definitely need to kind of work with it and live with it for a while to kind of understand what changes that you want to make. That being said, hopefully you're at a point where all of the major things in your story are there, all the major characters, all the major outlines, the major plot points. Hopefully by now the changes that you are making to your screenplay are minor. Hopefully they are little tweaks here and there. Maybe you're going to change this scene a little bit. Maybe you're going to change that scene a little bit. Maybe you're going to add a scene because you need something here. Maybe you're going to tweak some dialogue, stuff like that. Hopefully that's at the point that you are at. If you're not at that point, that's okay. You still got plenty of time, but don't wait. Don't wait. Like, you should be actively working on that screenplay, and you should be actively revising it, because you're going to run out of time pretty quickly, and we need to move on to the next stages of pre-production and the next stage, and then into production. And you don't want to be trying to fix your screenplay in January, because that's just not going to work. That'll set you back a lot. So make sure that you are actively working on that, and you should be doing that continuously on a continuous basis. Today, we are transitioning from writing to the next stages of pre-production, which are the industry practices to get us ready for production. The idea is we're going to take your screenplay and turn it into a movie. You know this to be true. But that's the stage that we are at. We are now at the point where we are really going to start working with your screenplay to create the plans to actually create it in its movie form. Which means obviously that you need a finished kind of screenplay to work with. Because if you're still changing and revising and doing major edits to your screenplay, a lot of what we're doing next has to kind of be put on hold until you are prepared for that. So we're going to get into the next stages of pre-production, and I'm going to teach you how that works. But understand that a lot of what we're talking about today, you can absolutely get started on right away. But if you make big adjustments to your screenplay, then you're going to have to do this process again, because you're changing your pages. And so that you need to kind of have that as we go on. So I did send an email, and I mentioned it in class the other day. If by chance you printed out your latest revision of your screenplay, it might be great to have with you, just so you can kind of follow along. We're not really going to do a whole lot with it, but it might be helpful to you just to kind of look at your own screenplay to understand some of the things that we're talking about today. You don't need it, but if you have it, it might be helpful, even just to have a page of it or something. That might be beneficial to you as we begin working on the next stages, which are pre-production, part 1, in which today we'll be discussing the script breakdown. Now, if we were in class today and we had the normal amount of time that I normally have, I would be combining pre-production lesson part 1 and pre-production lesson part 2, and we'd be actively working on these screenplays in class. But since we don't have a whole lot of time as we normally do, we don't have that 2.5-hour block that we're used to, I decided to keep these two parts separate. So today, we're going to just focus on this first part, which is not too bad. It's pretty simple. It's pretty basic. You'll get the hang of it very quickly. And then on Friday, we'll have the larger portion of our lesson, which gets more into the cinematography and the planning of shots. So that's exciting. So I would encourage you to have definitely on Friday, have a revised, ready to go screenplay printed out, because you're probably going to want that for Friday. Today, it's not as important. So today we're going to focus on the script breakdown. And the script breakdown is kind of the first stages of the pre-production phase. So hypothetically, you have a finished final screenplay. I know that's not the case. I know you're still revising it. I want you to still revise it. I'm encouraging you to still revise it. But for the purposes of educational class time right now, pretend that you are in the industry and you have a finished, final, locked screenplay. It is done. It is not going to be changed. It's not going to be edited. It's not going to be reworked or anything like that. It is finished and complete. And when you have a finished screenplay that's bought and sold and ready to go, and it's got a green light, then you get the green light to kind of go into the pre-production of the film. So this is not writing anymore. Now we're actually doing pre-work before the actual production of the film. And it's kind of an exciting time because it takes that finished screenplay and turns it into plans for a real movie. You can kind of see how your movie's actually going to start coming together. And it's kind of invigorating because it's like, oh man, I can actually do this. I can actually make this movie. I can see how all the parts are going to come together. I can see the movie in my head, and it just turns it into a little bit more of a reality. But it is the first stages of really getting going and making stuff happen. Pre-production consists of a great many things in the industry. And we did a few of these things last year, but not nearly all of them. Pre-production is a large process. In fact, if you were to break up the amount of time that each stage of the film industry takes, if you were to break up pre-production and you were to break up production and you were to break up post-production, pre-production would be the bulk of your time. It would be a lot more than the other stages. Post-production would also be a large chunk. Production, the time that you're actually on set shooting, is actually the shortest period of time that you spend when making a movie, believe it or not. And that's sometimes counterintuitive. A lot of my students think it's the opposite. A lot of them think that production, when you're hitting the camera and hitting record and getting your actors and capturing all the video, most people think that that's the time, that's what takes the most amount of time. And that's not true. That's not true. You should be spending a lot more time on pre-production, and you should be spending a lot more time on post-production than you do on production. If you're spending that much time on production, it's probably because you're doing something wrong, or it's likely because you didn't do enough pre-production. Because the whole idea of pre-production is to get you through the production stages very, very quickly and efficiently. Because in this industry, as I've told you before, time is money. Time is money. And the entire purpose of this pre-production process is to get you to save as much time as possible, to shoot production as quickly as possible, and thus to save as much money as possible. So the better you get at pre-production, the better and more smoothly you will move through the other stages of filmmaking. So there's a lot of aspects of pre-production. They consist of a great many things. Are you ready? Here's the list. Okay. There is the pitch. There is the written treatment or synopsis. The project then gets greenlit, which kicks off the production phase, the pre-production phase. The finalized screenplay is written. The script is page locked and scene numbered. Then there's the storyboard, the script breakdown, the lining of the script, the casting, the hiring of crew, the financing and the budgeting, the locations, costumes, props, etc., the shot list, the shooting script, and finally, there is a shooting schedule. Okay? This is a lot of stuff. This is a lot of stuff. And you're going to do virtually all these things for your film. You're going to do virtually all of these things. We're not going to spend a lot of time on a storyboard because most of you are second-year film students, and we did a storyboard last year. So I'm not requiring that of my second-year film students. However, if you found storyboarding to be helpful to you last year, by all means, you may find it helpful to you this year to storyboard particular scenes or particular sequences from your movie to help you plan out your shots in that way. That is a useful tool that you should absolutely use if that's something that will help your film in the future. So there is a lot to do. There's a lot to do in this pre-production phase. And today we're just focusing on one thing, which is the script breakdown. And this is kind of the first part of pre-production. It's basically extreme organization of your film. Extreme organization. If you like being organized, you are going to love the next several weeks of pre-production. If you are not an organized person or you don't like organizing things, maybe you're not going to like these next couple of weeks so much. But you will find either way, you will find that there are a lot of opportunities to be creative and to kind of see your film come together regardless. So even if you're someone like I was when I was your age in high school, who was not very organized and who was not very good at planning and scheduling and things like that, I think you will actually find that this can be a fun experience nonetheless. There is something fun about organizing your film and putting it together. It feels real and feels like it's really coming together, and it's kind of fun. And you make creative decisions along the way that help you understand your film and how to prepare for it and plan for it when maybe you otherwise wouldn't. So the script breakdown is really just that extreme organization of your screenplay. We're going to categorize our characters, our locations, our props, everything in your screenplay. We're going to break it down and really categorize everything and organize everything so that we are well prepared, so that we're not going to run into any problems on set. So the communication between our crew members and our actors and our different departments is good. It's important to have all these things organized so that we know whose responsibility it is to get the 5 extras that we need for this scene, or to get the specific prop that we need for this scene, or to get the right wardrobe. Right? Whose responsibility is that? Is it the actor's job to remember to bring that sweatshirt that they have to wear in your film? Or is that your job? Or is that your partner's job? Or is that somebody else on your crew's job? Like, these are things that you have to think about. And this process of breaking down your script will help you organize everything in such a way that you aren't going to make those mistakes, so that you don't show up on Thursday all ready to film, and then you realize you forgot this, or you forgot that, or you totally forgot that this scene needs this. And now you're standing around wasting a whole bunch of time and money, and now your actors are not happy, and now your crew is not happy, and now they're less likely to help you again in the future. So this is just a way to help you prepare so that you can really be prepared for your shoots and get through them as quickly and efficiently as possible. It's just there to get you ready for production. So the script breakdown, the first thing that you do, and if you have your script handy with you, you can kind of follow along with this just to kind of get an idea. But this is really simple. The very first thing that you do is you just number your scenes. And that's the easiest part, and that's the first thing that you do is you just go through your scenes and you number them. Every time you have a location slug line, every time you have that, interior house, night, right, that kind of stuff, you just put a big number next to it. Scene number 1, scene number 2, and you just go right down the list. Scene number 3, scene number 4. And if you end up revising your screenplay later and you add a scene or you take away a scene, you just put in a new number. So you might have a scene, you might have scene 7 that's been slotted in between scenes 2 and 3. That's okay. That's all right. Nothing wrong with that. Nothing wrong with that at all, because you're not going to shoot this in order anyway, right? So it doesn't really matter. As long as you know and everyone is on the same page about what scene is what, it doesn't matter. So you just go through them and you just number them based on the slug line that's there at the top of your location. Very, very simple. The next part of your script breakdown is what we call breaking your pages into eighths. And this is a process to help you realize how much you actually have to shoot and how long your scenes actually are. Because sometimes you'll have a scene, like I could hold up this page, for example. You're not going to be able to see it very well, but like here are some pages from my screenplay, which we didn't get to read during table reads, sadly. Very sad. So sad for you. You miss out on the wonderful experience of my screenplay. But here, for example, and I'll hold it up so maybe you can kind of see so I don't know if you can see it all that well, but like this is basically a page worth of dialogue. There's not a lot going on there. It's just dialogue. All right. So if I break that into eighths, I can look at that and realize, oh, this is actually not that much. I can shoot that pretty quickly. Whereas if I was to break this page up into eighths, where it has a whole lot of screen direction, as you might be able to see, maybe, I don't know. That's going to take me a lot longer to shoot. That's going to demand a lot more, right? So this process of breaking up your pages into eighths helps with the planning, and it helps with the scheduling, and it helps people kind of understand how much work they actually have to do on any given page or on any given shoot. So once you break the page into eighths, then the next stage is that you do color coding with your characters and your locations and your vehicles and your props, your extra sound, everything, all this kind of stuff. And this level of organization is great because then you can give all this information to the different departments so that everyone's aware of what they are responsible for any given shoot. And that just kind of divvies up the responsibilities, because there's so much to do, as we saw on that huge list of pre-production. Like, there's a lot. And you need to have a team of people on a big budget film. You got to have a team of people to be able to do all this stuff. So organizing all these things in this way allows each team to know what they specifically are responsible for. So everyone knows what they need to do. And that helps break up the work. And it also helps make sure that there are no surprises on set and that everyone's super prepared, and that there's no accidents or there's no time wasted while you're trying to wait for this or wait for that or get this or we forgot this wardrobe or this prop or whatever. It helps everybody know, helps everyone know what their responsibilities are, and that just makes sure that you know, nothing falls through the cracks. So we're going to watch the first part of this little video, and then we'll talk about it a little bit, and then we'll watch the second part. This comes to us from our friends at Rocket Jump Film School, our good old friends at Rocket Jump Film School. And this is actually a really good informative video. They're going to take us through this process of breaking down a script. So we're going to start with a segment about breaking lines into eighths, and then we're going to get into the categorization and the color coding of it. So if you have your screenplay handy with you, I would say that this is something you can follow along with. If you have a pencil, I would use a pencil for this. When you're breaking down your screenplay into eighths, I think it's wise to use a very light touch with a pencil and not a pen or a marker or anything like that, because these screenplays are actually going to get really messy with a lot of other stuff as we keep adding on to the pre-production process. So if you have a pencil, you might want a ruler or a straight edge, or just eyeball it, whatever you think is best. I'm not looking over your shoulder. I'm not grading this right now, but this is something that you will have to turn into me eventually on your final revised version of your screenplay. So this might be good practice for you today. All right, so we're going to start with this segment here, which is about breaking down the scripts into eighths. And then we'll watch that, and then we'll talk about it briefly, and then we'll move on to the next segment, which is about the color coding.
Hi, my name is Andrew Spieler, and I was the first assistant director for Rocket Jump the Show on Hulu. And we're going to talk a bit today about how to break down a script. This approach is something that is typically done by the first AD, but I'll tell you, if you're a director and you want to be a good director, this is something you should do too. It really applies to the creative process and to understanding what's on the page versus what's in your head and how to properly communicate that with all of your departments to really make the most of your directorial skills on the day. By the end of it, you will really know your script inside and out, and every good director and every good first AD should know that way in advance. The most important part about breaking down a script is essentially being organized. As you can see on the table here, for educational purposes, we have mapped out our elements of a script to a color. And we pulled these off of a software called Final Draft, which is sort of a standardized screenwriting software that comes with an additional piece of software called Final Draft Tagger. Tagger is essentially a way to go in and do what we're about to do physically in a software sense. You can feel free to use whatever colors you want when you're breaking down your script, as long as you've assigned a value for them and you know what that value is. So just real quick, these are some of the elements that you're going to be looking for that most of the time you're going to find in any kind of a script. Obviously, if you're doing a special genre script that has an element that's not on this table, you just add it and assign a color to it. You may not need some of these, and that's fine, but it's good to sort of have a sense of what you're looking for initially as you go through. And we're going to use High Plains Drifter, as you may remember from the show, as the example today. So we'll start breaking this thing down. All right, let's get into it. So, scene one. Once you jump in here, you've got your scene heading, you've got your action description, and then you've got all of your dialogue and description in between dialogue here. And as you can see, scene one starts on page 1 and ends on page 2. And you determine how long a scene is by breaking it up into what we call eighths. Now, eighths essentially are eighths of a page, where you take the ruler, and as you're going through into about 8 lines, so that's about what it would look like. So the reason we use eighths is because it gives us just that much more detail and specificity on how long a scene is according to the page. Because if you just did a page and a half, that would be a scene larger than what this really calls for. So to be able to say that this is a page and 2/8 allows us to know that it's a little more than a page, but it's not huge. And as you can see here, the last 2/8 are just an extra line of dialogue. So really, it's a scene that would last for about a page or so. And as you go on, you'll kind of just sort of get used to this. Your eye will become trained to looking at a script and quickly saying, oh, this page is, or the scene rather, is 2 pages and 3/8, or oh, this is a 4-page and 1/8 scene, that kind of thing. But these page numbers and the page count are very important, and you want to keep a log of them for each one of the scenes on your side note paper.
Okay. So pretty basic, pretty self-explanatory. You just grab that ruler and then you draw some simple lines and kind of break those things up into eighths. So when you're done, it might look something like this. So here's our little pretend screenplay, and then there's the lines that kind of break it all up into eighths. Now, there's a couple rules when you do this. You're not breaking up the page, the full page, into eighths, because the page has margins, right? Like there's space at the top and there's space at the bottom. That's not what we're breaking up. We're not going to have an eighth of space because that doesn't count. We're breaking up the actual content. So you want to break up, you want to draw these lines to break up the actual content of your scene and not necessarily the amount of space on the page. So again, the first thing you're going to do is number your scenes. And then you're going to break the pages into eighths. These do not have to be exact measurements. You're not going to get out a ruler and measure by the millimeter to make sure that these are all exactly the same in terms of like this eighth and that eighth and that eighth, because that's not the way it works. You don't want to break up dialogue. You don't want to draw lines through words, and you don't want to draw lines in the middle of people's lines. Okay, it's about breaking up the segments into the appropriate sizes. So you're going to eyeball this a little bit, which is why he said after a while you kind of get used to just understanding what an eighth is. So you might round up or you might round down. So like on a finished screenplay like this, for example, you might have a segment that's an eighth and another segment that's an eighth and another segment that's an eighth, and then here's a big chunk of dialogue or something. That's not dialogue, that's just action. And then we might have 2/8 there, and then we might have some chunks of dialogue there. So there they've divided that last segment up by 3/8, right? So you kind of can use, methods like that to sort of divide up your content without drawing lines through stuff. Now, you still might draw lines like over here. You guys can see my mouse. So like over here on this segment here on 43, like I might still have drawn the line in between these two, right? These 2/8 right here. And over here, I could have drawn lines between this as well. I could have drawn lines after the action here, before Roy's line, and then I could have drawn a line after Sim's off-screen line right here, because he's off-screen, so the camera is still going to be on Roy. So I could have drawn a line there, and that could have been another eighth, and so on and so forth. But you kind of have to look at what your script calls for and what makes the most sense in terms of where to draw those eighths. I've seen people use rulers like this, where they kind of made preset lines to kind of match the page, so they have an idea of where those eighths should be. This ruler is divided up into 10 segments because, again, we're not using the top portion of the page or the bottom portion of the page, because those are margins, right? But after a while, you just kind of get used to this. You just kind of get used to looking at it and understanding kind of where the lines should be. The industry always uses the fractions eighths. They don't say a page and a half. They say a page and 4/8, or they say a page and 2/8. They don't change the denominators. So just so you know, when you're on set, you always want to use the eighths, just because that's the way that they talk. You want to use the industry language as appropriate. And this is all done. This whole purpose is done for timing and scheduling, to help people realize, okay, I've got eight eighths here to shoot. How long is that actually going to take? Well, I know I can do an eighth in half an hour or an hour or whatever it is, right? So getting an idea of how long each scene is helps you kind of understand how much time to budget for your shoots, which is something that you're going to have to do and plan for in the future. So if we were in class today, I would give you a preset printed copy of a 3-page screenplay that I wrote for this purpose. And I would break you into groups, and you guys would together as a group figure out where to draw the eighths, and then all the groups would compare notes and see if we all lined up in similar ways. Obviously, we are not in class today, so I'm not giving you my 3 or 4 page screenplay to work with, but you have your own screenplay in front of you, maybe, perhaps. If you've been following along, feel free to kind of draw a line, or maybe just draw a line in your head and think about where you would put those 8s, because you're all going to have to do this for your screenplay. So at the end of the semester, you have all this pre-production work, this pre-production package that all needs to be submitted. This is kind of the big thing this semester. The big things are your screenplay and your pre-production package. And your pre-production package consists of a great many things. And this is kind of the first part of that. So you're going to have to turn in somehow, some way, your screenplay at the end of the semester with it broken down into 8s. So probably the best way to do that is to take photos and share it with me, or create a document or something like that. But this is something that you will all have to do. So get comfortable with looking at your pages and figuring out where the 8s are. It's not that hard. Once you get the hang of it, it's pretty simple. The rules are just, remember, don't break up lines, don't break up dialogue, that kind of stuff. But after that, it's not that hard. Which brings us to the next portion of this video, in which we're really going to start getting into the categorization, the breaking down of all of the elements of your screenplay. So this is really informative and kind of interesting. And this is done for all major productions. And you may find that you really like this kind of work. And if you like this kind of work, then maybe you should look at a career as a coordinating producer, because this is the kind of thing that they would have to do in the early stages of pre-production. All right. So this is going to take us through this next segment here.
So now, this is where the color comes in. So you'll see here we have our first character introduced in the first line of action, Sally Westfield. So we'll grab our cast members line here, and what we'll do is we'll go ahead and underline Sally Westfield with blue. Okay, so we have a bar of a Western saloon. So right away, I know that means that we're going to have some serious set dressing that's going to be time period based. So I'm going to go ahead and take my green set dressing pen and underline bar of a Western saloon. Because I know that a bar needs bottles and glasses and bar stools, and they might also need bar patrons. So yet again, I'm going to take my extras marker and I'm going to go ahead and underline that light green with the dark green to remind me that I need to ask and see if we need to also have extras in this bar. And then there's another character here called the bartender. The bartender pours her another. So it's not a specific prop, but it's clear that the bartender is going to be pouring something into Sally's glass. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take props, and I'm going to go ahead and just underscore pours another. As far as props go, props are anything that any of the characters interact with physically. So there, I'm going to make a little note and say, okay, the bartender needs a bottle and Sally needs some kind of a glass. And we also wanted to find what kind of glass and how many times are we going to pour, and do we need resets? And is she going to drink this glass? And if she does, what's going to be the fluid in the glass? So as you can see, it goes down to a very finite level of information that you need to get to and almost sort of decode what's on the page. So right away, here's only 1/8 of a page, and we've already discovered that there's quite a bit of elements and stuff that we need to discuss and talk about and figure out in more detail. Bartender, say sheriff, and she got a race coming up. Sally looks up, angry. Sally, not anymore. Sally slams back her scotch. So, slams back her scotch. Slams is in all caps, and slams could mean a sound, or it could just be the action of what she's doing. So what I'm going to do is go ahead and note that as potential sound, that we're going to see her take her drink, slam it back on the table. And her scotch. So that's also a prop, because she's clearly going to be drinking it. She reaches into her pocket for a flask and takes a pull from it. Costumes, orange. So her pocket means that whatever she's wearing needs to have a pocket for the flask to slide into. Now, this may seem very detail-oriented, but these are the kind of things that when you sit down and talk to a director about, they might say, oh, they don't need a pocket. She can just pull it out of anywhere, and I'd rather her not actually have pockets. So that was really more of something that the writer came up with, but not something that the director is going to actually use. So then you want to make sure you go and communicate that with costumes, and then costumes goes, oh, good, because I was going to get a thing with like 8 pockets on it, but if he doesn't want pockets, I want 2 pockets. So little hints like that are very important. You obviously have another prop. It's a flask, which we find out later the flask takes a bullet and saves Sally's life. So you know you're going to need 2 versions of that flask, a clean one and one with a bullet in it. So again, later on, as I go through the script, I'd be making a note saying that we need to have 2 versions and make sure that we have the right one on the day that we're shooting the scene. Sally looks toward the saloon's door. We see Hayward, an obvious bad guy who kind of looks like an oil tycoon, flanked by like 2 of his cronies. So what I would do is I would take the green and I would highlight 2 cronies. But then as I go through the scene, I notice that one of those cronies has a line of dialogue. It says, "Crony, yeah, Sally, misplace your horse? Haha." Which means that now one of the cronies is background and the other crony is an actual principal character. So I'll underline the crony here that has the line of dialogue, and I will go back here and I'll make a second marking with the blue under the green, under cronies, to remind myself to go in and discuss which crony is going to be a principal actor and which one is background. Or if they are both principal actors and the second crony just hasn't spoken yet. Saloon doors. So that would also be most likely a prop and a set dressing, because it's going to be inactive, but they might have saloon doors that swing, so the actor's going to be interacting with it. So does that fall in set dressing, locations, or props? That's one of those things that you got to kind of go and check and see who's going to be responsible for it and exactly what's going to be happening with those doors. He produces a piece of paper with deed to the town, props. The entire saloon laughs. Okay, so this is again going to be extras. We have to figure out how many saloon members there are, and laughs is going to be sound. Exactly who's laughing and how many are laughing is actually an important detail that you want to ferret out. So we're going to jump ahead to a couple of different scenes that have some unique elements to them, just so you can get a sense of what else might be a stunt or a special effect. And there were plenty in High Plains Drifter, so we're going to take a look at those. In scene 4, Sally opens the door to her house, raising her oil lantern, obviously a prop. Sally sees her entire family has been shot and are dead, face down in their soups. Now, that may seem like a simple enough description, but there's actually a lot to be mined from this. How many people are in her family? If they're shot and dead, are we seeing blood? If they're face down in their soups, are their faces submerged in liquid, which would actually be a stunt, especially if we have kids on set who need to put their face in water. And most ADs will tell you that a stunt is anything more than a walk. And maybe we're running someplace that's got gravelly stone and it's actually harder to run than you realize. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and put face down in their soups as a stunt. And I'm going to go ahead and take special effects and put that under been shot and dead. Just in case there's any kind of a blood gag or special effects makeup that we need to worry about. And usually what I do too is I'll also list makeup with any kind of special effects makeup type work. Because you could have somebody who's been shot and is dead and have them have a blood gag, which would technically be special effects. But if you want them to look dead and drained, that would be makeup. So therefore you want to make sure you know who's doing what and covering your bases during your breakdown so that you know that you need to define which department's going to be handling what element. Here we have a cavalry saber. It says Sally catches up to the female crony of Haywart's. The two of them bump each other for a bit until Haywart's crony produces a cavalry saber and swats at Sally with it. Sally dodges to the side and holds on for dear life, barely clinging onto the side of her horse. She opens the saddlebag and produces a whip. Now, not only is this a major stunt, but also involves animals doing a stunt, and stunt riders and weapons. So something we also don't have here, I believe, in the element breakdown, which I usually do make, is a list for prop weapons, or just weapons in general. Technically, they would fall under props, but I usually categorize them into a special prop category, because on larger shoots, props are not going to be responsible for any weapons or guns. It's going to be a weapons wrangler. So in this case, I will use the black, and I'm going to underline cavalry saber and whip. And I'm going to put a star next to these. So that way I know when I'm going back through that we really need to talk about the saber, and if it's going to be rubber, or if it's going to be real, or if it's going to be plastic, what it does, how it's being held, how it's coming out, if it's got any kind of a sharp edge to it. And then same thing with the whip. How long is the whip? Does it really need to actually whip onto the saber? Is that going to be a special effect? Where is the whip going to be on the horse? All these sort of questions have to come up and be answered before you step on set, because if you're figuring that out on set, it's already too late and you're going to burn a lot of time trying to come up with how it's going to work. If you're doing something, say like a feature or a short that has more than one story day in it, you want to go through and define for yourself at which scenes the story days start and then where they end. And what you'll do is you'll have your story day list, and then you're going to want to go ahead and run it and cross-check it with your other departments. You want to check with costumes and you want to check with makeup and see if they have different story days or if they have multiple looks for a given character within the same story day. Die Hard is a really good example of this. His white shirt that Bruce Willis wears at the start of the film to the end has multiple stages, and even though the whole film takes course over one night, the costume department had very particular looks of dirtiness and actually had different shirts that weren't white anymore. They were like a gray. So that as the character progressed and the arc progressed, so did what he was wearing, which gets to be the really fun part of storytelling when you start using these elements to your advantage to convey story and character. So there is a level of creative liberty as you're doing this process. It's not all tedious. It's really thinking about what's happening in the scene and, again, trying to read between the lines and making notes about it to bring up to make sure that you've talked about it before you get there. So once you've done all of this, you will then move into creating something that looks a little more formal. And you can get these, you can download a breakdown sheet, and once you've inputted all of this information into a computer, it'll spit it out and give you a nice clean text format, and you can do it by department. And it's a really great way to just sort of check and double check with all the departments to make sure that everybody's on the same page, because again, it always goes back to communication of crucial information. So I hope that this was helpful. There's no right or wrong way to go about how to break down a script as long as you're thorough and detailed with it. And that's something that will lead into the scheduling process, which will be done in another video. Have fun, be safe, and good luck.
Kind of cool, huh? Informative. Did you learn something?
Honestly, though, like highlighting stuff looks kind of fun.
It is kind of fun.
Like, I
It's
hate
super fun.
organizational stuff. I'm an incredibly disorganized person, so I'm not looking forward to these next few weeks. But just like I love color coding things, so I feel
It is super fun. And as he mentioned in the video, there is a creative mindset to this, because you're thinking about how you want your movie to look, and you're thinking about how you want the props to be and how you want the characters to. You're just figuring out all the details of your movie, and ideally, you like your movie. You're excited about your movie. You guys wrote it. You guys want to create it, right? So ideally, you're excited to create the movie that you're creating. So figuring out all these little details is kind of fun, and it's kind of cool. And categorizing them and putting it all together, you're making creative decisions along the way. Like, how does this need to work? How does that need to work? And when you start putting it together, it feels real. Like, it feels like this is happening, like this is really coming to fruition. Which is super cool and very rewarding. So even if you're someone who's not great at organization, I think you will find this to be a fun experience for at least a little while as you start piecing together your stories. Just remember, you have to be really detail oriented and really get things down to the finest detail, as he demonstrated in that video. You got to think about every little thing. It's really easy to miss stuff, like pours Sally a drink. You don't even think about, like, oh yeah, that actually means three things you have to think about. Something that's being, the canister that's pouring, the canister that's getting the glass, the glass that's getting the stuff that's being poured. And you also have to think about the liquid that's being poured, right? So you have to think about all that kind of stuff. And again, this is all about getting everyone on the same page and making sure that when it's time to shoot, you have there are no surprises, and you're all ready to go, and that you can do it as quickly as possible. Because as he mentioned, and this is really true, if you're trying to figure this stuff out on set, it's already too late. It's already too late if you're trying to figure this stuff out on set. You've got to plan for all this stuff ahead of time, which is why pre-production is a huge bulk of time that you need to spend before you ever actually go on set to start shooting stuff. The more you plan, the better off you will be, and the more swiftly you'll be able to shoot your movie and get onto the post-production stages, which is what you want. All right, so to wrap up our slides here today, when you have a finished screenplay, it might look something like this, where you're highlighting all the words and phrases, and you can see all the little different pieces that are here in this example. A few bits of advice as you guys begin to do this for your own films. For character names, for example, I would not highlight every single character name. You don't need to highlight their dialogue heading, for example, or stuff like that. I would highlight the name of the character every time they appear for the first time in a scene, which is what he did in that example video. If you need help, go back and watch that video again. It's in my slides that I'll share with you today, and it will also be in the video recording that I'll upload to my YouTube channel. But you don't need to highlight again and again and again. So for example, in this image right here, here's Kyla. That's an interesting name, Kyla. And we've highlighted her the first time she appears, but we don't highlight her again here, and we don't highlight her name at the top of dialogue, and we don't highlight her name here because we've already done it. We understand that she's in the scene because we're breaking this down by scene. And as a new scene, when I get to scene number 2 or scene number 3 or scene number 4, I would highlight the first instance of the character name again. Because again, like I need to figure out which characters are in which scenes. Make sense? You guys with me on that? Yeah? Okay. All right. I haven't lost you yet, have I? No? Okay. All right. So you're going to need to make yourself a key, something similar to this. Again, you can use any colors you want. It doesn't matter. I like to use colored pencils when I do this. I think it's a little bit cleaner than using like a marker. That's just my preference, but you can do whatever you want. If you're using Final Draft, if you're one of the people that got a license from me and you're using Final Draft and you want to try to do this digitally in Final Draft, you may. That software is in there. It's kind of hard to find. You'll have to Google around to figure out how to get to it, but there's a Final Draft tagger, and you can actually do this digitally. And when it's done, it kind of spits out a nice, like, kind of finished kind of breakdown sheet for you, which is kind of cool. But either way, at the end of the semester, you're going to have to show me your screenplay with all of the breakdown and the lines and all the other kind of stuff that we're going to be doing on this screenplay. So that may or may not be useful to you. If it is useful to you, you might still need to print it out, is what I'm saying. You're still probably going to have to print out your screenplay so that you can do the other stages of pre-production that we're going to be working on. So after we've done the first part of the breakdown, you're going to color code and do all this stuff with characters, locations, props. Be really, really thorough. Go over it more than once, more than twice. You'd be surprised what you might miss. You got to be really detail oriented about this stuff. Again, the goal is to make production as seamless as possible so that you don't miss anything or forget anything and nothing gets lost or through the cracks. And then once you have that, when you do start getting ready for production and you start scheduling your days for production, then you can start to divvy up responsibilities. You can say, okay, this is your responsibility, this is this person's responsibility, so on and so forth. And that way, you know, it's a lot harder to forget everything when everyone kind of has their one job kind of a deal, which is why the film crews have big giant departments of people who are all responsible for specific things. If we were in class today, we would take the little screenplay that I gave you, and we would get into our little groups and we would break down the screenplay using my colored pencils. And then we would compare notes at the end to kind of see how we all did and if we all got everything and did it right. Since we're not in class, we're not doing that today. I reserve the right to use my little screenplay that I wrote, my little 3-page screenplay that I wrote for something else in the future, depending on time this semester. But you have a green light to begin working on this process for your own film. Again, if you're revising your story, you're going to have to do it again. So you want to make sure that the parts that you're working on are parts that you're maybe probably not going to change. But if you do wind up changing it, you'll have to break it down again, which isn't so bad. Like, it doesn't take that long. But the next stage that we're going to be working on Friday is a little more demanding. And that's where we really get into the cinematography of stuff. And as we get into the cinematography of stuff, it's going to be a lot more daunting in terms of the creativity and the level of thinking required, and also the amount of work. So if you're changing things at that point, you're going to have to do a lot more changing things for your pre-production package. So my advice would be, as we get closer to Friday, try to have a closer to more finished revised screenplay. Not to say that you can't keep revising it for the next several weeks, but the quicker you get that revised, the quicker you get through these other pre-production stages. Any questions about anything that we discussed today? No? Pretty clear? It's kind of a fun process. Even if you don't like organization, it's kind of fun. I think you will enjoy it. Putting it together is kind of fun because it really starts to make your movie feel like this is happening, this is real, like here we go. It's kind of a fun feeling to kind of realize that you can do this. You can actually do this. You can actually go through all these little steps bit by bit, and you'll get there. My advice to you over the next several weeks as you're working on stuff is work on something for your narrative basically every day. You can give yourself a day off over the weekend or something like that. But my advice would be every day you need to do something. This is a big, giant project that is not defeated all at once. It's you win this project by chipping away at it little by little, and that's how you don't get overwhelmed. That's how you spare yourself from getting, too stressed out. So my advice would be every day, just make a note in your head. You got to do something on this project every day, even if it's a small thing. If it's a revision for a scene, if it's contacting your actors, figuring out locations, gathering props, talking to your partner, whatever it may be. My advice would be to work on something, just something, every single day for your narrative, because that's how you win this project. That's how you make it through to the other side. Is just by chipping away at it slowly and surely, not in big giant bursts at the end, because you won't make it if that's your strategy. So that would be my advice. Okay, we're pretty much done for today. So on Friday, we'll have a longer lesson. If there are no other questions, that's all I have for today. I'm letting you out a solid 20 minutes early. Hey, that's pretty cool. Please remember that the next time I keep you here late. On Friday, we'll have a nice full lesson, and then we'll have a nice break for Thanksgiving, and then we'll do our final pre-production lesson when we get back. And then after that, I have my favorite lesson ever that I will be sharing with you. My favorite lesson ever. That is near and dear to my heart, and I hope you will enjoy it. So that is something to look forward to on the horizon. I'll see you on Friday. You do not need to wait to begin these first stages. If you want to break down your script right away, go for it. No harm, no foul. There's no reason why you can't get started on the stuff that you already know you're going to keep. Okay, farewell. So long. See you later.
Thank you.
Bye.